Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Guthrie. I'm a professor of law and the dean of Vanderbilt Law School. On behalf of the law school, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2011 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Lecture. This lecture is the law school's contribution to the university's annual celebration of Dr. King's singular life and lasting legacy. For making this lecture possible, I would like to thank Associate Dean Lisa Bressman, the Dean's Office staff, and the law school events staff. In December 1962, nearly 50 years ago, Dr. King spoke at Vanderbilt Law School. In his lecture entitled "The Ethical Demands for Integration," he argued that the problem of race and color prejudice remains America's greatest moral dilemma. When one considers the impact it has upon our nation, its resolution might well determine our destiny. History has thrust upon our generation an indescribably important task to complete a process of democratization which our nation has too long developed too slowly, but which is our most powerful weapon for world respect and emulation. As Dr. King himself observed in 1962, we have made some meaningful strides in breaking down the barriers of racial segregation. But then, as now, inequities and challenges remain. Our speaker, whom it is my pleasure to introduce, is able to speak to these challenges from a unique vantage point. Judge Roger Gregory, Vanderbilt's 2011 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Lecturer, is a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, where he holds at least two important distinctions. He is the first African-American appointed to serve on that prestigious court, and he is the only circuit judge to be appointed by presidents from both parties, President Clinton in 2000 and President Bush in 2001. Judge Gregory graduated summa cum laude from Virginia State University and received his JD from the University of Michigan Law School. Among many, many other achievements, he has received honorary degrees from 4 universities. He has received multiple awards in honor of his accomplishments and his commitment to justice, and he has served as the chair of the Judicial Conference Committee on the Administration of the United States Courts. Today, Judge Gregory will deliver a lecture entitled "Until Justice Rolls Down Like Waters." After delivering his prepared remarks, he will take questions, time permitting, and then join us for a reception outside the auditorium. Please give a Vanderbilt Law School welcome to the Honorable Roger Gregory.
Thank you very much. I always like to say I like to thank the members of the Academy. I'm sorry, I just love that. Dean, thank you very much, and thank you to the students, Tamara and Tracy. You gave me a great escort from the airport, and students I met with, Boston students, and the Dean's office staff, and Professor Bressman, Michael, and Professor Seymour. A wonderful lunch. And in short, the Commodores have done a great job to be awfully nice and kind to this fellow from Petersburg, Virginia. Thank you very much. Professor Bressman was telling me of the prior speakers, and a bit daunting because it reminds me of this story of this fellow who was trying a case in some small town. He was against a big lawyer, from a big-time lawyer from a big city. And they were trying the case, and the big city lawyer was very arrogant and just very rude to the witnesses because these were rural people. And one fellow was down there, and he was cross-examining, and the fellow kept saying, "Likewise and also, likewise also, likewise also." So finally the big city lawyer says, "Listen, sir, I noticed you used the term also and likewise, and do you even know what the difference is?" So the farmer scratched his head and said, let me see if I can explain it to you. You see, the judge up there, he's a lawyer, and you're a lawyer also, but not likewise. So when it comes to these speakers, I may be your speaker also, but I'm certainly not likewise. So I count it a great pleasure and just incredible privilege to be here with you. And I'm going to save the time for question and answer because I love dialogue, the back and forth, and that's always helpful. To this day, 25 years ago, President Reagan signed the legislation that made Dr. King's birthday a holiday. And over that quarter of a century, we have now begun to see slowly, as you would naturally think, but the morphing, if you will, of Dr. King into a more distant historic figure who is often referenced as a civil rights leader or the recipient of a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, while this holiday, as the dean, I think, referenced, is a monumental achievement in terms of racial relationships, it alone gives us very little idea and connection to Dr. King in our everyday lives. And that is especially true of those who were born after 1980. And looking around, I suspect that applies to a significant number of people in this room. But I believe that if our intent of this celebration is to cast light on Dr. King's purpose and power, I'll say that again, if we're going to cast light on his purpose and power, I think we have to go beyond just recognizing his laurels or referencing high school textbook accounts of who he was. You know, it is somewhat ironic that the unintended consequences of his great speech at the March on Washington has had incredible consequences, and that is it has given an inordinate amount, in my view, of attention on his dream and little on his demand. You see, Dr. King was not a surrealist. He neither expressed his subconscious mind with fantastic imagery, nor did he espouse some irrational juxtaposition to realism. In fact, the reality of racial discrimination and inequality had its own grotesque and bizarre that was exhibited every day. So there was no need to be a surrealist. It is little value to observe Dr. King's birth without making at least a good faith effort to understand his life. You see, he was not just a dreamer, and he was more than a dream. As a matter of fact, Dr. King, if you look at, that's why I bring my case to the law school, because you are people who look at texts and law professors, and you explain them, and you tell us how horrible we did on opinions, and we try to explain them in opinions. So I know you know this material. But if you look at the text, one really, really could not come away with a good student to say that the emphasis was on the dream. The emphasis was on the demand. As a matter of fact, historically, if you looked at his prepared remarks, they were the first half of the speech. In fact, the dream was, if you will, in the normal tradition of the Southern Baptist preacher, was the hook, if you will. It was, that crescendo, you might say, in music. But instead, he came with a present demand. So you wonder, why is there a great deal on the dream? But it sort of makes sense because it's like one of my favorite historian philosophers, Thomas Carlyle said. He said, the great mission in life is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but instead to do what lies clearly at hand. So Dr. King wasn't focused on some surrealist idea of what was in the distance. His demand was what was clearly at hand, and that is justice now. In fact, he said that we will not be satisfied. In the existential tradition of the existence and the conditions of the dispossessed, until these things are done, we will not be satisfied. And that question, and that's his cadence first with the repetition was, before I have a dream, it was first, when will we be satisfied? No, not as long as the Negro from the South has no right to vote and the North have no reason to vote. Not when there's police brutality, not when there is clear rejection of those promises made on the solemn oath of our great documents and our proclamations and our preambles and declarations. No, not until I will not be satisfied until justice roll down like waters. That was the demand. It was the fierce urgency of now, as he said it was. So it's amazing how somehow the greatest speech, I should say the most noted speech of Dr. King is sort of taken on this great power of the dream, and in some degree we lose sight of his power and purpose and not understanding what his present demand was, because like he understood what Carlyle did, that he wanted to deal with what was clearly at hand. You know, and as students and all of us, we're always talking about, and again, an existentialist aspect of it, and that is, I will say that for an existentialist, and Dr. King was quite a student in the sense of Paul Tillich, and an existentialism and theology standpoint, is that the critical element of choice is not correctness, it's commitment. I'll say that again. The critical element of choice is not correctness, it's commitment. Everybody always wants to say, well, you're not going to get this right. Well, we can't always get it right. We don't always know whether this decision is right, but it's commitment that's the critical element. Ask anyone who's been married for a while. You know, people say, well, you know, was he the right person? Was she the right person? I don't know. We'll never know. There may be 100 people, 1,000 people that might fit that bill. But the question is not that. The question is commitment. And Dr. King knew that well in terms of what his idea about love and what his firm beliefs were. It was commitment. So everyone said, well, how do we do this and deal with that? For example, like Brown. You saw that, right? 1954, well, separate but equal is wrong. It violates the Constitution. But then they said, wait a year. In a sense, you would say, well, you know, they were right. You shouldn't be beat up, but let's beat you up for another year, and then we'll find out what we'll do about it. But I understand the balances, you know, because we wanted America to come around to the decision. It might be better. But I can tell you what happened in my home state. While they waited during that time, there was deliberate speed, and deliberation was, what can we do when finally we'll have to implement this decision? And we'll close schools in Prince Edward County for 5 years, and there'll be no school for children for 5 years. So in the sense that Dr. King always talked about the urgency of now and how it somehow morphed to a surrealism dream, and that becomes the mantra, it's very difficult to understand when the text of the speech clearly says, I'm talking about now, and not until justice rolled down like waters. And I'm talking about real waters, like the Niagara Falls. You know when it goes over, anybody knows how deep that is, where it goes over the lip? On a normal flow of the Niagara River is about 20 feet deep. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine justice flowing down like waters? Where it goes over the cliff is 20 feet deep. That's what Dr. King was talking about, the riches and the fullness of justice, just overflowing, the cup overflowing. You know, it was in times, in ancient times, your cup overflowing represented hospitality. That it was rude for a guest not to have an empty cup. So when your cup was prepared in the presence of your enemies, it overflowed when the guest said, you're so important that I'm not even going to worry about looking at it. I'm just going to pour it until it just keeps overflowing, let you know how overflowing you are, my guest. That's what Dr. King was talking about, his images, talking about it was room for everybody. Nobody had to worry about a dry cup. It was nobody to say, I'm lacking. It was the full measure of faith and all those things that our Constitution said that we were heirs to. It was not about a dream. It was the stark reality of now. But, again, national holidays have a way of centralizing you because we all have to find a commonalities that we can say. That's why you notice Dr. King never talked against the war if you looked at how he celebrated. It is interesting, he never did. But you know he did. Anybody who's a halfway student of his life, certainly he did. And many people didn't understand that. His friends. How can you speak against the war and all those things that the Johnson administration has done for you and the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65? Because he said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It didn't make any difference whether those people were from Southeast Asia or from East Cleveland. That's the kind of person he was. So it's even his friends didn't understand. He said, well, Doc, I thought this was, this was kind of like the strategy, but No, this is not strategy. This is about love. This is about a force that's more powerful than anything else. It's the only thing that can make an enemy a friend. It's the only thing that can conquer hate. And he understood it wasn't politics. It wasn't a stratagem. It was about justice rolling down like waters. And he picked the minor prophet. I'm not a theologian, but you had to get a little theology today, too. But he picked Amos. Amos is not one of the major prophets in Judeo history. He was a minor prophet. Matter of fact, he wasn't learned. He didn't go to the academy. In fact, he was a shepherd. And he also was a farmer of the sycamore fruit. But he was called by God to give a message to a people who had forgot about justice. In fact, the scripture said that they were abusing the just, and they were denying the poor justice at the gate. And the gate was the wall where courts were held at the time. And that's what he was speaking to. He spoke truth to power. So if we're going to understand the purpose and power of Dr. King, we have to look at his Judeo-Christian roots and from which it flowed, and when he talked about justice rolling down. In a sense, I think in Dr. King's wonderful style of Amos is saying that we all can give that message. It matters whether you have letters or not letters. And I understand that in terms of my background, coming from a family where I was the first to graduate from high school, let alone to go to college, then go on to law school. I always tell people that my parents got up early so that I'd have more time to sleep and dream about what the things I might become. And they earn wages while I earn letters. And my responsibility is to make sure those letters and those dreams come together, and no matter what I do, that they spell justice, a rightness, a commitment. They're not always correct, but always trying to be just and committed to something beyond themselves. So that's what Dr. King talked about until let the waters roll. So therefore, when we talk about the idea of a dream, instead what Dr. King was really espousing was not a dream, but about his faith. That's what he was talking about. In spite of the brutality that I have seen, in spite of all of those things, the ugliness and the mean-spiritedness, I still have faith in not man, God. Now, people, and see, but sometimes we want to turn around and say, oh no, he still had faith that America would one day come around. No, that's not what his faith was. That's the result of what he believed would come about, but that's not what his faith was in. His faith was in God, and that would come about. It's a big difference. It's a big difference because Dr. King talked about time. He said that people talk about time. Well, give it time. It'll change. Give it time. Give it time. He said, no. Time is a neutral force. It doesn't work for anyone. Nothing rolls on the heels of inevitability. Justice is not inevitable. It must come by choice, not chance. It comes by time of work, of faith and will, but not just rolling in that sense. So Dr. King understood that. And as Paul said in the book of Hebrews, he said that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. That's what he had his faith in. The substance of all of those people who came up from the narrow jails that he talked about, from cotton fields, in places where they couldn't spell court or justice if it was written on the wall as big as it is from that window here, but it was in their heart. It's like the little girl who was marching, about 5 years old, down in Alabama, and then the little boy and the sheriff or whatever deputy came to her and said, do you even know why you out here? Your mom and daddy just put you out here. She said, I'm out here for freedom. She must have been from Boston. She couldn't get that R. She said, feed them. But in her heart was the searing words that no one could turn her out. And I love what Langston Hughes talked about there when he talked about I Too Sing America. He said, I'm the person that you put away when it was time for supper. and the big dinner came, you put me in the back somewhere and act like I wasn't there. But instead of ruining the day, I went back and I kept eating. And I kept getting stronger all the time and got all of those things, because one day will come when I will be strong enough and I will take my place at the table and I will not be denied, because I too sing America. And that's what Dr. King was talking about, the faith that he too, he gave voice to the dispossessed. It wasn't some dream, it was the reality of what was there. And how do you know it was not a dream? I'm just trying to give you the facts. Couldn't have been a dream, because how would you have survived after that great speech with 250,000 people, black, white, Jews, and Gentiles, Protestant and Catholic of goodwill, coming together and say, yes, we can do something different. We can make this country what it ought to be. 18 days later, he would get the call while he was in Atlanta that there was a bomb went off at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham at 10:30 in the morning while they were preparing for church service. It was Youth Sunday. That Sunday, it was third Sunday, September, and they had just finished Sunday school. And guess what the title of the Sunday school lesson was that day? It's amazing how history comes together. It was The Love That Forgives. That was the title. And these four little girls, among others, were in the basement of the church when the blast went off. It was so powerful that it rocked buildings about a block away and broke the windows out. Among the shadow, they found the four little girls. Dr. King had to come to Birmingham and tell people to stay calm and do not rise with their instincts to retaliate. But I'm going to tell you in terms of what happened beyond that, in terms of had to be faith. He had a call to the president. The president was very sympathetic with the situation. And he was still encouraging Americans of goodwill to respect the rule of law and the laws of the ruling of the federal courts of integration and desegregation. But he was adamant also that Dr. King must continue to tell black people to resist the sentiments of violence and retaliation. And no one could guarantee that the bombings would not reoccur. But Kennedy knew that it was crucial to maintain, if they're going to maintain white support, the movement could not come down to a racial struggle. And he was right. Dr. King understood that, because nobody would ever remember who started it and how righteous the cause might be. But if it came down to a racial struggle only, he knew he would lose those people of goodwill who, white and others who were helping. But this is what he said to the president, to Dr. King. Therefore, he told Dr. King that, quote, I think you got to tell the Negro community that this is the very hard price which they have to pay to get this job done. The very hard price they'd have to pay. One could not have a dream to sustain alone, to sustain that type of reality. To be able to look those people in the face and see four little girls whose mangled body, one, matter of fact, the only way she could be identified was the ring on her finger. The finger was still had the ring, and they knew that's which one she was. But in the midst of all of that, he still had faith. And although he characterized it as a dream, when you look at it, it was faith, because when he finished that, he said, it's with this faith I return to the South. The preceding was the iteration of dream, wasn't it? Some of y'all lawyers, y'all had to figure it out yourself. See, I'm just saying, but there's no way you could really defend that otherwise from an intellectual discourse and exegesis if you were a theologian, or an analysis if you were a lawyer, or if you're on the street corner, just an opinion. I'm just going to tell it like it is. And how we morphed into something else, you'll have to decide, because you're the learned. I come to the academy in that tradition that you sit among academous olive groves while the Greek philosophers taught. And while you sit among the olive groves, you pontificate that. And how do we get that? But it's the danger of morphing into something that is not. To taking out, again, I started to say the power and the purpose of Dr. King. Yes, the holiday, the celebrations are great. But if we miss that, if we don't make a good faith and honest effort to understand that, we lose the power of it all. The power to make a difference, as opposed to annually just saying something, but instead believing and doing something, and that justice is there. Dr. King's classmate, one of his classmates at Morehouse, Charles Willey, said something that I thought was quite profound, so I quote it to you. And this is my other segue in terms of what does this mean to you. Remember I told you the way we celebrate doesn't connect to you as much as it should. You know, I'm an old person. I'm different. I understand. I saw Dr. King when I was 8 years old at First Baptist Church in my hometown. I saw Dr. King in 1966 in July in my hometown. I might add, that was the first time he spoke against the war in Vietnam, not the Riverside Church speech, but in Petersburg, Virginia, 1966 in July. But the April 1st, 1967 speech got the notoriety because he was at Riverside Church in New York. But anyway, so I can understand that. So preachers who, Y.T. Walker was a pastor in my hometown. So a lot of people in Petersburg, Dorothy Cotton lived in Petersburg, and she was a wonderful administrator and gets very little recognition. Very little recognition. You hardly see in a picture, but incredible, the work she did with Dr. King. There are many heroines who were in the vanguard who don't get the credit they should. Viola Luizu, you know who she was? Look up at her in terms of just the power of people in black and white. She was a lady who lived in Detroit with 5 children. And she saw what was going on with the march between Selma to Montgomery. She left her children in Detroit and went down to Selma to help out. With no agenda, with no portfolio, but just love. That's the kind of, see, you've missed the power and purpose of something that a movement and a person could, not a dream, but the reality of the urgency of now. And she went down to help ferry them back and forth. One night on the whole highway between the stretch, she was shot in the head and killed. A martyr on the way. And people hardly remember her name. But those are many people, and preachers, and of course, Cheney and Goodman, Schwerner, Mississippi, 1964, Fannie Lou Hamer. Incredible names like that. See, we leave people out when we talk as just a dream, because dreams are private. They're the subconscious. Those are the things that, as if they're but no, it was more than that. It was a fierce urgency of now, and these faces and names and people get left out because there is no place in the surreal. Instead, we look for some irrational juxtaposition to reality or some imagery that was not existent. Instead, it was anything but surrealism. But again, and I want to take the time to say it because it disturbs me when I see these people like that whose names are just forgotten and all their great, their service. And it's like Frederick Douglass told Harriet Tubman, they met, and he told her, he said, Harriet, unlike me, unlike you, he said it, unlike you, I've had the applause from the audience, and I've spoken in England and all these places of abolition. But your heroism has only been witnessed by a few wary, trembling slaves and the midnight stars as she led to freedom. These are the people I'm talking about, that only the midnight stars gave witness to their heroism. And if we allow our celebrations, our commemorations, not to make an honest and an effort to look at those who open floodgates and the waters that now roll down for you. Perfect? No. A long ways to go. We're going to talk about that as I begin to move on. But they ought not to be plunged into the abyss of forgottenness, lost for the inattentiveness, the horrible lack of good faith research, scholarship, writing, and somehow lost in that. Because I don't see how you can understand Dr. King without understanding his Christian theology. It's like trying to understand some European leader without knowing what was going on in the Renaissance, or in the Dark Ages, if that may be their age, or to look at an Asian person in the Ming Dynasty and forget about all those things that were going on, the Boxers' Rebellion, without the context of, it'd be foolish. It would be foolish. And I know that we're going to do differently. That's why I bring my case to the academy. those who are the learned, because I can understand those people who have not been blessed to have the opportunity to go where you have gone and to be where you are, and you sit in a seat of great power. And to those who much is given, much will be required of you. And mostly what will be required of you is the truth, and tell the truth. You know, everybody wants to go to the top of the mountain. But I submit that the mission in life is not to be at the top of the mountain. Your mission is whatever part of the mountain you're on is to give witness to what you see, where you are. Because at the end of time, when there's a reconciliation of time and circumstances in life, you would not be asked, why didn't you get to the top of the mountain? The question is, why didn't you give witness to what you saw when you were on the mountain? When you were climbing, you saw that things were not equal. You saw that justice was being dispensed wrong and that people at the gate were being denied justice. You didn't speak. You didn't give witness to truth. You didn't speak truth to power. That's what Amos was talking about. And that's what Dr. King said. Not until justice rolled down like waters will I be satisfied, and I will not be satisfied. So therefore, we cannot placate that by calling it a dream when it was anything but. But this is what his classmate said. Oh, that was parenthetical. He said this: by exalting the accomplishments of Martin Luther King Jr., his classmate at Morehouse, into a legendary tale that is annually told, we fail to recognize his humanity, his personal and public struggles that are similar to yours and mine. And they were. He was a man, his feet were made of clay. People always get surprised. Oh, Dr. King did that? You mean he wasn't perfect? No, his feet were made of clay. That's why he understood that it was grace and mercy that put him where he was. That's what he understood it. And many times he dealt with the whole idea of the guilt of being the one always was in the limelight. Because he knew that there were other people who never got the recognition. He knew that. But that's what we have done. By idolizing those whom we honor, we fail to realize that we could go and do likewise. So when you make someone so mythical and so distant, you lose the power of their life. He gave his life that you might find your way, you find your markers along this journey we call the American experience. And this is a great nation, and we've come a long ways. But we still have ways to go, as Frost might say. We've come to the woods lovely and deep, but we still have miles to go before we sleep. This is not a time for slumber. Longfellow said, tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream for the soul that sleeps and slumbers, and life is not a dream. It's not a dream. It's no time for slumbering. It's time for to be awake and to be up and doing. And what can you do? First of all, you have to understand what is the role of being a genius. You are all geniuses. The question is, will you exercise your power? And Professor Trevor Roper described genius to me in a wonderful way. He said, this is what a genius is. A genius is not a person who gives new answers. A genius is a person who poses new questions that time and mediocrity can resolve. I'm going to say that again because you'll get this on the way back to home. So a genius is a person not who gives new answers, it's a person who poses new questions that time and mediocrity can resolve. Because see, that's why Dr. King was a genius. He was posing questions that it took time and mediocre minds to resolve. Why do people have to drink from separate water fountains? I don't know. We'll think about it. I see. Time, see? And then mediocre minds. Well, maybe you're right. No, it sounds funny, but that's really what happens in it. It takes time and mediocre mind. But that's what genius, they keep posing them. Why is it? Why is it that we still, I don't know, haven't found different ways that we still have almost 2 million people in the criminal justice system? We continue to warehouse and redo. But I think, wasn't it Einstein had said, that's the height of being idiotic, doing the same thing over and over again and think you're going to get a different result. I think Einstein said that. He was smart. See, he was a genius, see? Same thing. He's posing questions. How in the world are you going to come up with a new answer and you're doing the same thing? When I used to practice law, I used to do some criminal defense work, respectfully, of course. I would tell to the judge, say, well, Judge, it's time for sentencing. I said, Judge, all due respect, if medicine was practiced the way we practice law, then when it was time for major surgery, the physician would pull out a saw and a hammer. The hammer to knock you out and the saw just to saw your leg off. No, they're always looking for new truths, right? And law is the same thing. The side that can convince the judge that things remain the same wins. It's called stare decisis. Oh, no, I'm saying tongue in cheek. And of course, I follow that all the time. Are there any ashtrays in here? I follow that all the time. Did I say that all the time? But it's funny, though, isn't it? The side that says, don't be creative wins. No, don't be creative. No, we've done this for 100 years. I got it in the book. You see, somebody wrote this opinion 150 years ago, and it's not been reversed yet, so therefore you see what I'm saying? You get my point? All this is laughable, but medicine said, no. My job is to take it further today. The day I use this instrument, tomorrow I'm going to try to use a laser so you won't even bleed this time. We won't even use sutures. Oh, believe me, I can tell you, my wife died about a year and a half ago. It was an incredible journey. She had a brain tumor, and she had she had the big one. She had a glioblastoma, which is grade 4, one of the most deadly brain cancers. And talk about the vicissitudes of life. We were going on vacation in August of 2007, and then we come back a week later, and she's diagnosed with brain cancer. And it was an incredible journey. But I tell people, if you look at it just in the result, you miss it. And that's about Dr. King. If you look at just the result, that's not the point. It's the journey and the blessing we had going through. But what I want to share with you in terms about medicine and about what young people, your minds, I want you to be creative in things, what's left to be done. She had to start chemotherapy. So I went to the apothecary to get the medication. And I said, here's prescription. And the lady said, you don't have coverage for this. I said, no, yes we do. My wife worked, I won't name the corporation, she worked at the corporation. I work somewhere too. And so she said, it won't cover it. But when the computer says no, that means what? No. That's another topic. When the beast says no, well, that's another topic. But said no. So all these people are behind me, right? And she says, but think about it. There's a glass wall between us. I'm looking at the lady, and I didn't give her a hard time. She's just doing her job. But I'm sitting there. I said, well, my wife starts chemotherapy on Monday. She needs this medication. I said, what can I do? She said, well, you can give me $4,000 cash. I said, what? She said, yeah, $4,000. And people behind the line, I said, I'm sorry, holding you up. I said, no, that's okay. I was thinking, but here's what I want you to remember. I'll never forget this day as long as I live. While she was talking to me about the medicine, that my wife needed to continue her journey, the medicine came next to her in a dumbwaiter. Y'all know what a dumbwaiter is. That's what I was saying. The little tube that comes there, boop, comes out. So the medicine comes, and it's right beside her, and she's telling me my wife can't get the medicine. So glass wall, her denial, and $4,000 stand between the journey to healing. And I said, okay. And I left. And I know some people went home that night and said, guess what? There was a guy in front of me. They told me he needed $4,000. So, but I never mentioned I was a federal judge because that wasn't important. It's the least of these. I should be treated any different than anybody else. It's not that I'm a judge. It's that I'm a human being. I stood beside. So that wasn't the issue. So I never talked, well, I'm a judge before. No, I was just like everybody. I wanted to be just like everybody else. There was nothing like that. But my wife needed it. But anyway, long story short, Monday we got it all straight. Obviously it was coverage, and we got that. But the point is I never forget that. How many people there are on the other side of the glass that can't get it straight on Monday? And in terms of the image of justice and letting it roll down like waters until we are not satisfied to those who can't get it straight on Monday. And don't forget that in terms of the glass wall, they look through that, looking and seeing what they need. If it's drug addiction, rehab, or getting their family and life together, whatever, they can't get through that glass. They can't slip through the glass yet, but they can see what they need on the other side. And I'm telling you, unless we find some way to understand what Dr. King was talking about, not the dream, but the reality that justice must roll down like waters, we all have a responsibility to help those who are on the journey looking for healing. And justice is a big part of that. And that's what Dr. King was talking about. And I don't forget that we can't forget those moments. And to think about what about young professionals and what you do, once you start talking, and Dr. King was so right about love, you start talking about color makes the difference. No, that people who love justice and work for justice, all different colors, creed, and you start getting, it's so destructive. And I learned that, thank God, even though I grew up in the midst of segregated South and segregated schools when I was 10 years old, and I won't tell you, don't even ask me how it happened, but it suffices to say for this point, I cracked my eyeball. I injured my eye. My mother said, something's wrong with you. I was trying to hide it from her. She said, you're going to the doctor. Here's what happened. Life lessons about justice and what it meant to be a real professional. I went to the hospital emergency room. It was about 10 o'clock at night. Doctor looks at me in the emergency room. He said, oh, he's all right. Send him home. But it just so happened that this young white physician came through. Now, I don't know, and you got to allow me some poetic license here. But maybe he was tired, had been for a long shift, and he was just getting off, or whatever the reason was. Providence would have it that he just stopped by and said, wait a minute, let me look at that boy. And he looked at me in about 2 minutes. He said, this boy's eyeball is cracked. If he doesn't have surgery right away, he'll be blind by tomorrow morning. They're about to send me away home. And then I'll never forget this. And he said, he needs to be prepared for surgery at midnight. And the nurse looked at him and said, we don't have any place for him. And he turned to her and he said, listen, this boy's going into surgery at midnight and you better have a place for him. And next morning, when I opened my eyes, my mom and dad were beside me. And guess what? I awakened in a large ward with several beds, and I was the only person in the ward. They had run out of space for Negroes. But for that physician, though, and I never forgot that, that's professionalism and justice. He could have easily said, well, I'm going home. I'm tired. Could have said, well, they said no room for him, then I'm going with what the normal flow is. But because he was willing to go wrong, because he understood what the justice of his medical practice was. See, people think justice is just for law. Justice is incredible. That's what Dr. King was talking about. And when you start talking about it's just a repository in a certain color and creed of people, no. It's everywhere, and connecting with goodwill and people of all colors and strife and creeds. That's what Dr. King was talking about. That's the energy of the love force that justice is flowing. And that was a wonderful lesson. So it taught me, and I think, don't do you give into the whole idea of evil and destructiveness when you don't understand a person's humanity. When you look at color and you stop there and you look at faith and whatever, or their lack of faith, whatever. Don't worry about that. Your time is to love. And that's what I want you to do. Dr. King was just like you. I want you to see Dr. King differently. It's so easy to see Dr. King in his point of segregation and all those needs and dispossessed. But let me give you another side of Dr. King. I'm going to put him in your shoes. Because that's why he had the dynamic of his life gives so much power. Dr. King, as you know, he had a PhD in systematic theology from Boston University. The street that he grew up on, he was born in 1929. Auburn Avenue had 5 or 6 black millionaires in 1925. You follow me? 4 years before he was born, there were 5 or 6 black millionaires on his street. His father was a prominent preacher. So what I'm saying is that, look, in a sense, just like you, he had it going on. He had choices. He could have at any point taken a professorship at Howard University. Yes, it was segregation, but let me remind you, You can say, well, he became a Nobel Peace Prize winner, but a Howard University professor was already a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Dr. Ralph Bunche. So my point is, he could have taken that track and still gotten to Nobel Peace Prize. You follow what I'm saying? It didn't have to be all of that. He had options. That's why I want you to see that side that is just like you. He chose to take that route. It wasn't because he inevitably had to. He was a person of means and choices, just like you will. But it's very difficult to understand a person coming through law school, doing very well academically without any concept of justice. And forget about it's not for just litigating. You know what's litigating? We always think, well, we're the real courts. No. No matter what you are, it's the whole idea of like a physician graduating from medical school with no concept of healing. No concept of justice and what in terms of working to make that difference. And I close now, but I tell you that I've learned so many lessons of being on the court. But I will tell you this. I want you to have the boast that was greater than Augustus. The Scottish jurist, I have a favor, a lot of Scottish people in this lecture, but Henry Brougham, he talked about the boast of Augustus. You know, Augustus was the first emperor of Rome. He said of himself, he said, when I came to Rome, it was made of brick. When I left it, it was made of marble. And the world will entice you with that, people. There's marble to be made here. After all, sometimes you have to make bricks without straw. But it's the people who made bricks without straw who built the monuments of lasting justice and still make great contributions in spite of the journey, of treacherous journey and the evils and the meanness that have occurred in their history. But they still made bricks without straw. But his boast was that it's now made of marble. But he did that at the expense of a lot of people, and a lot of enemies fell at his hand. But I like what Brougham said. He said it's a better boast, though, when you can boast this way. I found law a sealed book, and I left it a living letter. I found it to be the patrimony of the rich, and I left it the inheritance of the poor. I found law to be a two-edged sword of craft and oppression, and I left it the staff of honesty and the shield of innocence. That's what I want to be your boast. Whatever you do in the law, that it be that boast, not that brick turned to marble. Because life is not always the way. Life, as Langston Hughes said, ain't been no crystal stair. It's been full of tacks and boards all torn up, but I kept a-climbing. Yes, sometimes there will be brick steps. There'll be no marble, there'll be no laurel leaf to put upon your head. It'll just be the midnight stars. It might just be some person who, like Gideon, just put his petition in pencil. But it became the jurisprudence that said you have a right to counsel. So that is what I want to be your boast. And I end by saying this. When I got on the Fourth Circuit, I was recess appointed by President Clinton, and as you know, it says that until the next Senate adjourns, you may be gone. So I was there in a sense with some portfolio, but questionable portfolio. So I was there, and I want to say it clear, my colleagues were wonderful, welcome. I couldn't have been better and inviting. But I'm talking about it was kind of lonely. The building I'm in was the treasury of the Confederacy. Jefferson Davis' office was on the third floor in the building. I'm the only judge in the whole building. If you come to Richmond, I'd love to give you a tour. And the joke is that his ghost is still in the building. I walk around at night by myself and look around. I have not seen him. But if I do see him, I'm going to put him to work. But I'm going to pay him a fair wage. But I'm not going to let him work on any Title VII case. I think he has a conflict of interest. But the point is that when I was at the court, there was a man named Lorenzo, and we use sometimes the janitorial staff, maintenance staff, people who have sometimes challenges mentally and physically, and Lorenzo had both. And Lorenzo didn't know what was going on in Washington. You know, there was a Gregory's chance of being nominated by President Bush, 0 to none, and Slim left town, and all that stuff. But he didn't know all about that. It's just somehow our hearts connected with each other. You know, and we would joke and I would laugh with him. But here's the point. Lorenzo cleaned the brass rail. Now the brass rail is like a rail like this that extends from here all the way across the wall where the great Chief Justice Marshall is, Thurgood Marshall is. And it's made of brass. And Lorenzo cleaned the rail every morning. And I mean, Dean, you could shave by it. I mean, you could shave by it. You really could. Not a nick. And I would say, how you doing, Lorenzo? He would joke, how you doing, Judge? How you doing? So laugh. So then I was thinking to myself, pardon the parlance, but he cleans this rail every morning just for people to mess it up, But Lorenzo didn't care because he knew that was his job, and his job was to make that rail look good. And that's how God does. He puts people in your life. You don't even know their name and their faces, but they're making their way smoother for you every day. You don't even know their name. And they're proud of you, and they see you, and you don't even know their name. But some of them are praying for you and thinking about you, and you don't even know their name. But see, they're like Lorenzo. They just clean the rails so you might see and reflect yourself in those days when you think you can't make it, and see yourself and get heart and catch wind of yourself and get another strong move on your journey. But they're cleaning the rail for you. Remember that. So Lorenzo cleans the rail. So Lorenzo, he had cancer, and he died. And when Lorenzo died, no memo went around in the court because he didn't work for a judge. He didn't work in the clerk's office. He wasn't a clerk. He was one of those people that Abraham Lincoln would say that the world will little note nor long remember. But when he died, I had to let his family know that somebody saw Lorenzo and loved him. So I went to his funeral, his memorial service. And somehow always in the alchemy of God's hand, when you go to give something, you get something. So I'm there at the memorial service. Lorenzo had 5 brothers and a single mom. And the big brother was eulogizing Lorenzo. He was talking about playing football. It's something about dads are great. I had a great dad and mom. But mom, somehow they just do what's necessary. So mom played football with the boys. So the big brother is saying how he was a quarterback. He threw the ball, touchdown, touchdown. And then everything was going fine, and the mom would say, "Whoa, wait a minute. Oh, stop. Stop the game." "What's wrong, Mom? What we doing?" "No. What's wrong?" "You're not throwing the ball to Lorenzo." You see, just like the world, he had already decided what Lorenzo's potential was. He thought he might drop the ball, run the wrong way, wouldn't know what to do. See, that's what the world will do. It'll judge you by your problems and not your potential. That's what Dr. King was telling me, let justice roll down like waters. Give everybody a chance. And what the point was, we got to get people into the game because people have been marginalized and labeled and tracked, and what their potential are, we're not aspiring to all of their fullness just because of our short-sightedness. That's what I'm talking about, justice being equal. It's not just all those clear things about court decisions and what results might be, but it's the whole field. And that's what Mom saw. She wasn't looking at just touchdowns and fun. She saw that one of her sons was being marginalized and not getting in the game. And I'm saying to you, when you're the quarterback, if you forgive the sports metaphors, make sure that everybody gets in the game and for their full potential and aspiration. Don't limit by our short-sightedness, and that this is not a dream, and life is not a dream. And tell me it not in those mournful numbers like Longfellow. No, it's real and it's earnest. And make sure that that becomes reality for all. That's what Dr. King lived for, and ultimately he gave his life for. And to do less, we do a disservice to him, and more importantly, we lose that purpose and power that is left for generations, and that is his legacy. God bless. Thank you. Thank you. I think I have time for how many questions can occur in 4 minutes. Yes, sir.
My name is Jimmy Blazay-Strong II. I'm an advocacy coordinator at the Monroe Junior Children's Hospital of Vanderbilt. And I had to just speak, even though I came to just listen. But what you speak is still so true today, because I was born in rural Mississippi Delta. And I shucked corn and I planted beans, and I lived in a little town of 600 people where African Americans live on one side and Caucasian Americans live on the other. and all the Caucasian Americans go to private school. And segregation is still real even to this day. And were it not for people like you, I wouldn't have had the confidence to come here, the confidence to apply to this very law school, the confidence to say that I can be the first from somewhere to do something. Because every time I do a Google search for an African-American lawyer from Duncan, Mississippi, I find 0 names. And I find that unacceptable. I find it just by God that I can stand here, and that tells me that I have to be the one to go back and show other children that they can stand here, to show other children that they can be attorneys from prestigious institutions, that they can have more than what they see and be more than what their narrow and unfairly constrained neighborhoods show them. So thank you for being the first, and thank you for reiterating the dream that my grandmother taught me at 3 years old, that I have a dream speech. And I went to Morehouse College, Martin Luther King's alma mater. Thank you for speaking to him, the man, the person, and just thank you for all that you stand for.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for one more. If not, I think that we're just about at the time, Dean. And thank you all very much, and best wishes in your studies in this great institution. And as professor here, I'll let her remain anonymous, but good friend of mine, we served on the board together, so I know what great Vanderbilt material and wonderful people and great hearts and sharp mind and keen intellect can do, and you certainly fall in that wonderful, rich tradition, and it's very nice to y'all to host this little boy from Petersburg, Virginia. Thank you. Thank you, Dean.
Please join us and one another outside for refreshments. Thank you very much.